All right, I'm going to spend a couple of minutes. I'll give you our layout for the next hour or so, and we'll spend as much time inside the products as possible. So here's our agenda for today. First, we're going to do a short review of all of the current options available at the moment. Hopefully, some of these are familiar to you on some level. After that, I'll give you an overview of the steps to follow when setting up a BIM 360 project for Plant 3D. These steps involve setting up your members, creating space for the project, as well as establishing some roles in order to better distribute the permissions that you'll need for Plant 3D. We'll look at the process for sharing a project from Plant 3D to BIM 360 and working in Plant 3D after the project is set up. Lastly, we'll touch on the desktop connector, which is the utility that runs behind the scenes on your computer, and that enables local caching and working offline. This is also the component that ensures that you have fast access to your BIM 360 files. When using BIM 360 with Plant 3D, there is no more need for a giant expensive server and a VPN connection in order to work. If any of you have tried this, I'm willing to bet that the transfer times just to get your files open, saving them, and other basic tasks has been less than you would like. Here is a description of the common setup when using Vault with Plant 3D. We have customers that do use Vault in such a manner. This requires a server running SQL Server and two databases. Vault and Plant 3D each require their own database, but depending on your setup, you may have two servers, one for the Plant database and one for the Vault database. Users do have a local workspace for faster working that synchronizes with the server. The speed may be okay, but this setup was designed for on-premise only. However, some of you may be working remotely now, requiring a VPN to connect, which still may be okay due to that local workspace. Now, we have had reports of companies trying to work remotely without Vault. They may have a SQL server in the office, they're at home or elsewhere and using a VPN to connect, or maybe they're copying files locally and then copying back to the server via the VPN. There is no local workspace with this setup, which means that the transfer times for your data is likely to be so slow, you might not even be able to work. This is not recommended when there are multiple people working on the same project. When using Plant 3D 2021 with BIM 360, there is no need for that on-premise server, for Vault, or for VPN. Projects are stored in your own secure space in the cloud, and you still have a local workspace. The transfer times will at least be as good as what you're used to when working in the office, if not better. Plus, you'll have the added advantage of allowing greater access to the information provided by Plant 3D to all the stakeholders. These could be vendors, subcontractors, the owner, anyone who ever comes to a Plant 3D designer and asks for something that's coming from those drawings. Now, because of the security that BIM 360 provides, the other stakeholders won't be able to touch your design data, but they will be able to do things like view, markup, share, communicate, address issues, and so on, without having to ask you to export files, hand over your DWGs, make a bunch of copies, and email them around. This is how things get lost, outdated, and miscommunicated. BIM 360 addresses all of this because it becomes the single source of truth for your project data. And not to mention that the transfer times is much, much faster than over a VPN. All right, I want to point out a couple of advantages that you'll see while we're working here today. The first one is file locking. File locking will enable protection for your files in BIM 360. It'll prevent users from saving copies of drawings and causing duplicates and things like that. You'll be able to control the permissions on your Plant 3D data. For example, if you only want certain people to be able to enter project setup and make changes, you can do that. There's also a file compare feature allowing you to review changes to drawings when they're not readily visible to the naked eye. And you'll have version control of your data, allowing you to revert to a previous file. This means it won't be necessary for users to save as over and over just to capture yesterday's revision. All right, so let's get in and take a look. Now, I do want to point out that I have done a little pre-recording of certain tasks for today, since there is some uploading and some synchronizing that does occur when you're working with BIM 360. And this is how I'm eliminating you having to watch those things happen. So I am going to switch to that now, and we'll get started. So I'm going to pretend I am the account admin first, take you through a basic setup. And so we're going to be starting in BIM 360. And any of you who are already familiar with BIM 360 on any level, you'll be familiar with this. We just go to the web and log into BIM 360. And I'm pretending that I am the account admin right now. So that's the screen that I will see first. So if I'm thinking about a Plant 3D project, the first thing I'm going to do is add a new project. This will establish the space where the Plant 3D data is going to live. And I'm just going to fill out a couple of the basic slots here. We won't do them all. At a minimum, you have to have your language, the name of the project, and the project type. I'll also fill out a project number here, and we'll leave the rest blank. All right, now once the project is saved, then your screen will switch automatically to the project services. The only service that Plant 3D requires is document management. So we're going to activate that service for the project. Not going to worry about a template right now. And it'll take a few moments for that service to activate, and then we can go to the menu and switch to document management. Document management is the module where all of your files will be stored. And just for the sake of example, I am going to create a couple of folders here to pretend that we have a multidiscipline project, maybe some things that are happening outside of Plant 3D. So we're going to create a couple folders for those people. The one I'm not going to create right now is one for Plant itself. That one is going to be created once we upload a project from Plant 3D. So once we set up our space in BIM 360, we can then switch over to Plant, open up the project that we're interested in putting on to BIM 360, load it into the project manager. And this can be a blank project or it could be one that's already underway. It doesn't matter. You do have to open at least one drawing. It can be a blank one or one of your project drawings, doesn't matter. Just got to activate the ribbon. Then we'll go up to Collaborate and Share Project. That'll take us to all the projects that that user has been invited to. So if someone opens up this interface, the share project interface in Plant, and they want to share a project and their screen happens to be blank here, it's probably because one of the previous steps got missed and they might not have been invited to that project and given the appropriate permission. The project that we created a few moments ago is called Plant 3D Demo, so I'm going to pick that one here and just upload the project. Now this could take a few minutes depending on your connection and how large that project is. The one we're using here has a couple of models, a couple of P&IDs, a handful of orthos and ISOs. I think in real time it took about 5 minutes, so it could take anywhere from 1 or 2 minutes on up depending on the size of your project. If it's blank, it'll probably be more like a minute, maybe 2 at the most. All right, so once that project has been uploaded, you'll be told, you'll see this dialog here. I can start inviting members to the project. In this case, though, I want to do everything from inside of BIM 360, so I'm just going to hit close. And then we'll switch back to BIM 360. Now, notice that there is a fourth folder, and that is the Plant 3D project. I didn't bother creating a folder manually for this because the entire project folder structure from Plant gets uploaded to BIM 360. So down in Windows Explorer, I'm sure some of you have explored your project files in this manner. You will recognize the folder structures. So the entire project folder, based on your project name, is going to get loaded. So it'll be very familiar to you. Once that folder is in BIM 360, we can go to Permissions and start setting those up for each of the subfolders. Now, I haven't added any members or users yet. What I'm going to do for the permissions is assign roles. So instead of assigning individuals, I'm going to use some roles that I've created, and I prefaced all of these roles with the word plant just to make them easy to find in BIM 360. Roles are established at the account admin level. It's right next to members, and all I did was create 4 roles, and I named them these 4 names. So I have a plant admin. That's usually your coordinator, or maybe it's your point person, maybe it's your power user, whoever the go-to person for Plant 3D is typically would be the admin. Then I have a role for P&ID designer, one for piping, and I also created one for the spec admin, for those folks who prefer to have only dedicated people that are allowed to work on specs. So what I'm going to do here is just add all 4 of these roles under the permissions, and I'm going to give them the permission of view only just to get started. It's just a really quick way. That permission is common to all of our roles right now, but since this is the top level folder for all of the plant data, I do want to bump the plant admin's permission level, and I'm going to go pretty high on this one. I'm going to go to folder control. So the plant admin will pretty much have all the access from top to bottom, just like you would if your IT person did something similar to those folders in the Windows environment. Also, since we started with the top level folder, then the subfolders inherit these permissions. The next thing I want to point out is that I'm expanding on a couple of these roles. Notice that there are no users assigned to those roles yet. So what's going to happen here is once I start inviting people, I can give them a role and then the permissions will propagate. Now we do have to step through each of the folders that you want to do this to. For plant, I'm going to show you what I like to do as a starting point. It varies from company to company, but what I'm doing here is for each of the subfolders, if it's a Plant 3D related subfolder, then I'm bumping the permission for the piping designer role. We're giving it all the way up to edit permission for things like the isometric, the orthos, anything that a Plant 3D user does. For the P&ID drawing folder, then we'll bump the P&ID designer role up to edit. So really all you have to do is think about how you want your users to have these permissions in your environment, and you'll bump them accordingly for each folder. Now the common folders like the project recycle bin, related files, I like to bump all of the permissions up to edit for those common folders. Seems to make the most sense. Things that feel more like an admin or a project setup task, I like to leave those so that they're inherited from the top level. So for example, the report templates, if you want to control how people create templates, for the view templates and things in the data manager, then you can leave that for the plant admin. So for that folder, we're not going to do any bumps on the permission levels. Spec sheets will bump the permission for the spec admin role here. Now the reason I'm doing that is just as an example, and a company that I used to work for had dedicated spec admins. Only certain users were allowed to edit specs. That's how they protected their specs, so that a user that maybe hasn't been trained as well or doesn't understand what goes into setting up a spec, this is how we protect our specs. If we have an additional role for those, they can still use them throughout the project. They just can't open the spec editor and work on a spec if we add this level of security. This last one here, I'm just going to leave this one inherited from the top. A lot of the things that happen in this folder occur based on what goes on in project setup. So we will leave this alone. Just keep in mind that you can always come back to the permissions and adjust them accordingly for your environment. So that takes just a couple of minutes, to set this up. Once we're done with the permissions, then we will start adding members to the project. Now, as a project admin, I'll go to the menu and switch to the project admin screen, and I'll start searching for members. Now, I did this on purpose. I'm going to look for a member that doesn't exist yet. And when that happens, what you'll need to do is switch to the account admin screen and then go to members, and we'll add a new member to the directory. To do that, all you need is that person's email address. And while we're adding someone to the directory, we can also add them to a company. There is a screen in BIM 360 where you can create companies. It's just a piece of information. That way we can fill it in here and we know where these people are coming from. In addition to this, I'm going to go ahead and add a default role to this person when I add them. I'm going to make this person a plant admin, and then from here on out, all of the permissions will be propagated the way I want. So that adds them to the directory. Once they're in the directory, you can go back to the project, and under project admin, and then they will show up when you search on their name. And notice as soon as we add them, their default role is already in place, and they've been given access to document management automatically. There's no more work to do to assign permissions for that person. And just to show you how it's going to propagate, we'll take one last look over on document management. And we'll look at the permissions again. We'll just go to the top Plant 3D folder. And we'll expand under the Plant Admin role. And now you will see that member is visible under the permissions. So first we set up the roles. We just get the structure set up. And as soon as we start adding members, we just tell those members they're going to be a plant admin, they're going to be a piping designer, they're a P&ID designer, whatever your roles happen to be. And then if the permissions are already done on the folders, it all propagates. And the subfolders will inherit accordingly. So I like to do these one and done when it comes to the permission. So we do a little bit of extra setup, but then once you start inviting your people, then that's when the floodgates open. Now let's switch and look at things from the user's perspective. Once a member is added to a project, they'll receive an email that looks like this. Some of you that may already be using BIM 360, you may recognize this email. It's just a welcome email, and there's a big blue button to go to your project. All you have to do is click that button, and that ties the knot. It's how we make sure that that user truly does have access, so they'll sign in with their Autodesk ID. It'll take them to the home screen for the project. But when they go to the menu in BIM 360, notice that the only module they can see is document management. There's no admin access. So not only can we do permissions, but we can make it so people can only see what you want them to. We'll go ahead and go to document management here. I also want to point out that on the left, I actually created 3 other folders for this project, but this user doesn't have access to those folders, so they don't even see them. They only have access to what you want them to see. This is the only folder where we worked on the permissions, so it stands to reason that that's all they will have access to. Now, moving forward, the Plant 3D user won't be coming up to BIM 360 to work on files, edit files, or anything like that. I'm just showing you this screen to show that they do have access. Everything else from here will be done inside of Plant 3D, just like a normal workday. So I'm going to go ahead and sign out of BIM 360 for that user, and then we'll switch over to BIM 360. And we'll go to the project manager and open collaboration project. This will take us back up to our invited projects. And there's our one plant project right there. We'll open it. And at this point, the desktop connector is going to kick in, and it's going to establish those files down to your local workspace. You can open the files and do everything you normally do in Plant 3D. There is one added task, however, and that is there is a check-in and check-out behavior from here on out. It is very similar to the check-in and check-out behavior from Vault. In fact, I'll show it to you here, and I think you will recognize the interface. It's the same as the Vault client. So if you want to work on a file, you'll right-click on it and choose Checkout. That will establish all of the file locking that is required to protect that file. And when you're checking it in, it's the same as Vault. I think the dialog is the same as well. And you also have the options down below here in case you want to clean up your local workspace. And the other users in Plant 3D will be able to tell who has which files open, who has which files checked out, which ones you have checked out, and so forth. Now, personally, I don't like to have to right-click and check out all the time. So I'm just going to open a file here, and then I'm going to go up to the Collaborate ribbon and go to Options. Now, in the options, here's where we can control how the check-in, check-out procedure is going to work. I like to do a little automation here. So what I'm going to do is under check-in, check-out, I'm going to do checkout drawings and set it to when drawing is opened. That will take out that step of having to right-click checkout every file I want to modify. Now, this file I have open here, it was already open, so I would have to manually check this one out. But every file I open from here on out will be automatically checked out to me when I double-click to open it. So I'm just going to check this one back in since I don't need it. We'll just go open another model. And as you can see in the project manager, that file has been automatically checked out to me. Just a little way to automate, take a few picks and clicks out for you. You can also change the interval when the project gets refreshed in the options as well. The default is set to every 15 minutes. That is the only added step for the Plant 3D user. They can still stay in Plant 3D. They may never even go to BIM 360 other than that first time they log in. Also, right here, what I'm doing is just another example. Let's say if you are you've worked on a lot of files in a project, you've opened this and that, checked out multiple files, you can't remember which ones you've checked out, then you can right-click on the topmost branch in the project manager on the project name, and you can do a full check-in from there, and all of the files you have checked out will be listed. And that way you can do a one-time check-in versus check in each file individually. So you are able to do that. So that is the overview of the process for getting started in BIM 360 with Plant 3D. So now let's review. All right, so before a user does anything in BIM 360, make sure they install the desktop connector. Sometimes what I like to do is even before I invite them to a project, might just send them an email and ask them to make sure that's installed. It can be done at any time. It just needs to be done before they start working on a project. That way their local workspace will get created. Now, I think the easiest way to install this is to just do an internet search on this keyword here, and it should be the first search result, if that's what you use for the keyword. Next, we created a new project in BIM 360, added a couple of folders. We assigned permissions using the roles once we shared the Plant 3D project up there. After that, we invited a member, and we assigned one of those predefined roles. And from there, all the design work is still done inside Plant 3D. So really, if you think about it, the Plant 3D user really doesn't have to change what they do in Plant 3D. They just need to add and remember to check out files. And whether you use the option to automate that, that's entirely up to you. Now for the roles, I just wanted to bring those names up that I used or something similar. In my experience, these are the 4 roles that I recommend to establish in a BIM 360 account. I always preface these roles with the word plan, just for simple sorting purposes. You'll be able to find them and they'll be grouped together when you're ready to use them. And you may have 4, maybe you have more or less. That is going to depend on how you're using Plant 3D in your environment. Okay, next I'd like to show you where some of the resources are for BIM 360. When you're logged into your account, there will be a help icon in the upper right corner near the profile button. That will lead you to the Autodesk knowledge base, which has plenty of information for you to tap into. Of course, you can always use your favorite internet search engine. Chances are all of the search results, or many of those results anyway, they are going to circle you back to the Autodesk knowledge base. Here are the Hagerman resources that you can take advantage of for self-help. On our YouTube page, you'll find the recordings for all our previous webcasts. This one will be available shortly. Plus, we have plenty of articles on our blog at hagerman.com and even more content on our customer hub. I'd like to thank you all for attending.